Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've now reached the halfway point of our horror month, so on the third Sunday of October, and at the Channel Point's request of Blade, we will be reviewing The Strangers, which was released in 2008. So The Strangers is a psychological horror film which was written and directed by Brian Bertino. Bertino actually did not intend on directing the film originally, as he had never directed before, but a couple of other directors who had signed on ended up backing out, so the studio convinced him to do it himself. The movie stars Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman as boyfriend and girlfriend James Holt and Kristen McKay. James and Kristen end up spending the night in James's childhood summer home, which ends up being a pretty big mistake as they're stalked and assaulted by multiple masked strangers. The plot of this movie was inspired by the real-life murders of Sharon Tate and 3 of her friends by the Manson family in 1969, and also some real-life neighborhood break-ins which Bertino experienced as a child. And one of the reasons why those other directors backed out is they wanted a bigger budget, and Bertino ended up doing it on a solid budget of $9 million. The film gained mixed reviews from critics, but ended up being a sleeper hit at the box office, earning $82.4 million. The success of the movie ended up spawning a sequel to Strangers Prey at Night, which was released 10 years later in 2018. But why exactly were James and Kristen being targeted, and just what do these strangers want? Well, we're going to find out right now as we review The Strangers, released in 2008. So our film begins with 2 young boys investigating a ransacked house, as one of them calls the police and cries about there being blood everywhere. We then meet our main characters James and Kristen, who are driving to James' childhood home, and there seems to be a lot of tension in this car ride. James had decorated the whole house with roses for something that was supposed to happen and didn't, and he also calls his friend Mike to pick him up in the morning. So what exactly happened? Well, we learn through flashbacks that James actually proposed to Kristen, but she said no. They try to move past it, however, and are about to have some makeup sex before there's a very loud knock at their door, which is weird because it's like 4 in the morning. They open the door to find a young blonde woman standing there asking if Tamara is home, but when they tell her no, she simply walks away. James then lights Kristen a fire, and needing some fresh air, he decides to go into town and get her some more cigarettes. Kristen passes the time bored waiting for James to come back until there's another loud knock on the door. She asks who it is through the door, and it's the same lady asking if Tamara is home. Kristen's like, no, we already told you earlier, no Tamara here, and then she decides to lock the door, which she probably should have done earlier. She then sees smoke coming out of the chimney and notices the chimney flume has been closed. When she tries to open it, it sets off the smoke alarm. She tries to stop the smoke alarm, but another knock comes at the door and she drops it on the ground. She tries to call James on her cell phone, but it's dead, so she puts it on the charger and uses the landline instead. She tells James about the weird events, but then in the middle of their call, the line goes dead. And then in the best shot of the whole movie, we find out why she should have locked the door, as behind her we literally see a masked figure walk into the shot and stare at her while she peers around the house. And I also want to say that the scene uses no music at all, which was a fantastic choice because it makes it even more terrifying. Kristen then gets another knock on the door, and then she sees that the smoke detector that she left on the ground has been placed on a chair, and also somebody took her cell phone, which means, yep, somebody's in there with you. She then decides to look out the window, and boom! Surprise, motherfucker, there he is! She's full on freaking out now, as she should be, as there's a whole fuckload of banging and the record player's going crazy, and then everything stops and she hears footsteps. But the footsteps turn out to just be James, who is very confused as to why she's freaking out. She tells James what's going on, and they search the house for intruders but don't find anybody, but from the basement window they do see the blonde lady, now wearing a mask, staring at them. James decides to go outside to get his cell phone from his car, and then he realizes his car has been completely ransacked and trashed. The cigarettes got spilled too, and as he's trying to pick them up, a hand brushes the back of his neck. He then yells at the blonde lady again and sees somebody else running, but when he turns back around, the blonde lady has disappeared. And at this point, James is like, alright, yeah, we should probably get the fuck out of here, and they go to leave in his car, but then another car pulls up, driven by a masked brunette lady, who rear-ends them and forces them to run back into the house. They then hear more knocking and banging at their window, so James finds a hidden shotgun and loads it. The male masked intruder then starts smashing for the front door with an axe, but James wards him off with a shotgun blast. They then barricade themselves in the bedroom with a shotgun and wait for the intruders to show up. Meanwhile, James' friend Mike, who he called earlier, arrives outside and attempts to call James to come out before somebody throws something through his windshield. Side note, by the way, Mike is played by Glenn Howerton, who you might recognize as Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Mike sees James's ransacked car and realizes something is going wrong, so he decides to enter the house. He then walks through the house as, unbeknownst to him, the male stranger follows him from behind with an axe. And just as he calls out to James, James shoots him in the fucking face with a shotgun, killing him instantly. And then James realizes who he shot, and he's like, oh fuck, I just killed my best friend. James is completely distraught, but he also has an epiphany. Turns out there's a radio in the barn outside, so he's gonna go get it. He heads out there with the shotgun and sees the brunette lady patrolling the grounds with a flashlight. She spots him, and just as he's about to shoot her, the masked man runs up and knocks him out. That also causes the shotgun to discharge, and hearing this, Kristen decides to head for the barn herself. She doesn't get a very good start of it though, as she immediately trips and hurts her fucking leg. She makes it to the barn though and finds the radio and begins to call for help right before the brunette lady shows up and starts smashing the shit out of it. She then makes her way back into the house, where she hides in the closet from Axeman McGee over here. She then makes her way out of the closet and confronts the blonde lady with a knife, but James, who had just woken up off the floor, instructs her to run just as the Axeman walks in. She attempts to hide throughout the house, but the Axeman always gets his man, or in this case woman, and knocks her out. Well, it's now the morning and they've woken up and they're tied to chairs with the strangers just kind of staring at them. Kristen demands to know why they're doing this to them, to which the blonde lady chillingly replies, "Because you were home." They then decide to take their masks off, cause why not, and then take turns stabbing Kristen and James multiple times. In the aftermath, it looks like James is dead, but Kristen is not. In fact, she's still conscious, and she hears Mike's cell phone going off. She crawls towards it and tries to use it, but the Axeman hasn't left yet, and takes it from her before he does leave. The strangers leave the house in their pickup truck and roll up on the two young boys from the beginning of the film, who turns out are good Christian boys, and they give the blonde lady one of their Christian pamphlets. As she gets back in the car, the brunette lady tells her it'll be easier next time, implying that this murder was some sort of initiation for the blonde lady. And this movie ends where it started, with the boys rolling up on the house, only this time we get to see them investigate a little bit more. And the movie ends as one of them reaches out to touch Kristen's body, but she's still alive and reaches back. So first off, I want to start by saying that I had never seen nor heard of this movie before Blade used his points on it, but I gotta say, I really enjoyed it a lot, and I'm gonna get into why. One thing I really liked about this movie is that there's nothing supernatural about it. And don't get me wrong, I like supernatural horror as well. Right before I watched this for the review, I actually watched Halloween Kills, which I really enjoyed. But this was so much different than that. The horror in this movie isn't really in the jump scares or the attacks or any of that. It's more in the fact that it just seems plausible, you know? Like, they're just home invaders. When she asked the blonde lady, "Why'd you do this?" she responds, "'Cause you were home. You know, if you weren't home, it wouldn't have happened to you. It wasn't any kind of targeted thing, it's just they happened to be in that house. If they hadn't gone to that house on that night, it never would have happened to them. They would have just gone to another house." And shit like this is one of the reasons why stranger danger is preached so much to kids, because strangers are fucking dangerous, man. You shouldn't talk to strangers, you shouldn't trust strangers, because strangers might fuck you up and kill you and rob you and just, you know, stab you multiple times while you're tied to a chair. And I think that's one of, if not the best way to truly affect an audience. Hitting home, making them think, holy shit, this could actually happen. And another thing too is I always like when movies just get to the point and don't really overstay their welcome, and this movie did not do that at all. There was a considerable amount of build because it was necessary, but they didn't overdo it, as this movie clocked in a total runtime of 85 minutes, but if you shave the credits off, it's more like 78 minutes. It's a very quick film, and it gets to its point as quick as possible, while also having adequate build. And as I mentioned earlier, the lack of music in certain scenes really adds to it. Sometimes movies just don't need music. Music helps, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you can just go off a scene itself. That scene where he just walks into the shot, it didn't need any creepy music. It's just like, holy shit, he just walked in and he's watching her. Like, that didn't need any music, and I'm so happy that they didn't add any. And big shout to Brian Bertino. He wasn't supposed to direct this film. This is actually the first film he ever directed, but he did an incredible job bringing his vision to life. And I always like showcasing and recommending underrated films, so if you're looking to watch an underrated horror movie this Halloween season, I would recommend The Strangers, because it really gets to the point and it's really a fantastic psychological horror. What a great movie this was. You know what's not a great movie? The Exorcist 2, which we're gonna watch next week, also at the channel point's request of Blade, because Blade gives me this great movie and then gives me a shitty movie. Such is life. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my review of The Strangers. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave it a like. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're all in the description down below. Thank you to all of my patrons for supporting me and all my channels. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said, though, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my review of The Strangers, released in 2008, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.